Welcome to this week's On the Fly. I'm your host, Gene DeFilippo, and this week's guest is the very successful Executive Director of the Orange Bowl, Eric Poms. Eric, welcome to our On the Fly podcast.
Honored to be here with a great professional, but a better friend. Good to see you, Gene.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
You got a big game coming up between Clemson and Tennessee. You've got to be so excited about this matchup.
Yeah, we're really excited. You know, in this CFP era, you never know who you're going to get in your bowl game, you know, and so for us to have a perennial power in Clemson that obviously has been doing pretty good the last decade.
Yeah, they've been okay.
They've done okay, yeah. And to match them up against Tennessee, it's been 25 years since they've been back at the Capital One Orange Bowl. And I think you know firsthand what that base at Tennessee is. And they're just energized, to say the least. So we're very fortunate. Everybody's talking about this is the most Orange Bowl. And I went back in history. This is year 89 for us. And there were some other Orange games. You know, Clemson played Miami in the 50s, and Syracuse played Florida in the 90s, and Florida played Virginia a couple years ago. But I'm not sure anything can match Tennessee versus Clemson. I think it's the Orange Bowl coming up. So we're excited.
Oh, that's great. Eric, let's start with you. You and I have been friends for over 30 years. Some of the young administrators are out there, and they're saying, wow, this guy runs the Orange Bowl. How did he get that job, and how did he come up through the ranks? Take us from your days at Florida and up through the present time.
Yeah, I think everybody has a story, and I think there's quite a few basketball manager stories in our business. In fact, Graham Neff, the athletic director at Clemson, I think is another one. But I was in high school, I was a JV basketball player, not a varsity player. And so I became the manager of our team. And one of my best friends was a pretty good player in the year behind me. So when I went to the University of Florida, I just went as a student. And within 2 weeks, I got a phone call from Monty Tao, who was an assistant coach at the time for Norm Sloan, offering me a job to be a manager. And I was ecstatic. I didn't know how they knew that I was there. Little did I know they were in the living room of my good friend, and they were trying to get him.
That's
and
great.
He went to LSU, a guy named Ricky Bland, and he went to LSU, and I ended up at Florida. So I saw firsthand from my freshman year what it was like to be in an athletic department. And I was a business major. I was pretty good at organizing things, and I had no desire really to make this a career, but it already was one. I met so many people that to this day have helped me from my time at Florida. And so I did my undergraduate work there. I continued in graduate work, and I started working other events when I was in grad school. And there was a mentor of mine. There was two. One was Keith Tribble, who was there, who went to my high school 10 years before me. And he was an associate AD at Florida. And the senior associate was Jeremy Foley. And I got in their orbit, you know, and I communicated to them I wanted to get in this business. And right after I graduated, Keith had left. He went to Raycom, who was starting events that they could televise. Raycom's a television syndicator. And Jeremy knew that I was looking, and he put me together with Keith. And I went down, and it was a bowl game they were starting called the Sunshine Football Classic that became the Blockbuster Bowl.
Right.
And within 6 months, that little bowl game became Florida State versus Penn State, the first time Bobby Bowden met Joe Paterno in a postseason bowl game ever, I think they ever met. And that was the start of my career. So I got in there. I was an intern working for basically nothing. And but those skills, really, truly, that I honed when I was a manager came to light because I knew how to manage up, down, sideways, deal with different personalities, understanding, organizational structure. And it was quick for me to integrate that into a starting bowl game. And so I did that for 2 years. And then one of the other assistant ADs, you get the drift here, at Florida, became the athletic director at UNLV. Jim Weaver, your friend, took the job
Yes,
out there.
Jim's longtime friend.
Yeah, so before I knew it, Keith was joining him, and they were starting the Las Vegas Bowl. And so UNLV was attached to it. So they hired me to be their liaison to that bowl game and to also do facilities and operations for UNLV. And I was out there for 13 months. I loved it. It's the first time I moved somewhere I didn't know anybody. And then Keith got the Orange Bowl job. Keith Tribble was the CEO, and I had ties, obviously, to Miami. I grew up here. And so he brought me here 29 years ago as his number 2 right-hand guy. And I just did everything with him for 13 years. And it was a great run. And he ultimately became an athletic director at the University of Central Florida. And it was almost 16 years ago that I had the opportunity to fill his big shoes. And I sit here today with you. And, it's a very unique position. I mean, there's a very corporate side to, doing postseason bowl games, particularly at the New Year's Six level. But it also has a very community element to it, where it's been built upon generations of people that do this, as their give back to the community. And so you got to balance the two, the corporate side with the South Florida, Miami history. And I've done it for now 29 years here at the Orange Bowl.
All right. I know it must be upsetting to your wife. You've got those 3 beautiful children, but when they come to your wife and they say, okay, he works on New Year's Day, what's he do the rest of the year? And
All the time.
All the time. So
yep.
let's just say that you and part of your staff take a week off after the bowl game.
Yep.
Okay. Take us from the month of January through and talk to us about all of the volunteer help you have, all the people that are selling sponsorships, and all the things that take 1 year to get ready for one day.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's asked all the time. The reality, when you do these historic bowl games, you could throw the Rose, Sugar, Fiesta, Cotton, Peach, others, Citrus, Music City, you name it, have elements. But, we go back almost 90 years. So, you work for the Orange Bowl committee. The Capital and Orange Bowl is the signature event. It is the event that everything pretty much revolves around. However, you're doing events all year, not just the bowl game, but all kinds of events.
Can you mention coming to some of those events, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, we do one of the biggest junior tennis tournaments in the world, the Orange Bowl International Tennis Championships. We do an Orange Bowl Sailing Regatta Series. It's probably, if not up there in the top 2 international sailing regattas in Biscayne Bay. It brings, thousands of participants, the athletes, their coaches, their families to the marketplace. We have our Orange Bowl Basketball Classic, which, we've done for 27 plus years now. Our community outreach programs aren't just give backs. They're events, they're programs that take a lot of energy, and they're strategically placed throughout the year. Some are fundraisers. And on top of that, we're very involved with bringing the national championship game, the college football playoff national championship game, to our marketplace, which is a totally different element. In years past, as you remember, during your time as an athletic director, the national championship game rotated to bowl games on an annual basis. Not anymore. It's bid out to communities. But because of our history and our place in South Florida, we lead the host committee for the national championship game effort. We had it in 2021. COVID came. We still pulled it off with the CFP, but we were awarded the 2026 game in August. So between all these things, you stay really busy. What I would tell the audience out there is different than a franchise, professional franchise, NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, et cetera, and different from the athletic department. The infrastructure of bowl games revolves around volunteerism. So you build the infrastructure with a professional staff. We have 30 full-time positions.
You have 30 full-time positions?
We do.
Great.
We
Can you
do.
mention a couple of those, please, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of reflect what you see in an athletic department. You've got the marketing, you've got the ticket sales, you've got the public relations and communications. You go to the business office, you got HR, you got the finance department. You go into the internal side of things. You have events, you have community outreach, you have the executive office. You got all those elements that are in play, and what drives these organizations is revenue, just like most businesses. So you have a robust partnerships department and a fundraising element, whether it's grants and other revenue opportunities. And we're built that way. But the strength of the Orange Bowl committee is the committee. A lot of our members, and they are predominantly C-level executives in the Tri-County area, South Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach. And through their membership, you're able to navigate the community, whether it's through corporate, outreach, whether it's through governmental outreach. You're able to get to who you need to see. And the thing about the Orange Bowl, particularly the Capital One Orange Bowl, is it's the longest standing event in South Florida. There's nothing that touches the Capital One Orange Bowl game. 89 years is a long time. I mean, Miami was discovered in 1896, and the Orange Bowl officially started in 1935, but it really started in 1933 with a game called the Palm Festival. And so, we mirror that. There's so many great events, obviously, throughout the country, but here in our marketplace, we have the best of racing, Formula One, NASCAR's down here. We have PGA Tour here. We have one of the biggest tennis tournaments outside of the four majors here in Miami, the Miami Open. But the difference is the Orange Bowl isn't owned by anybody. It's owned by the community, right? So, I'm a professional on their staff, but our members, they're stewards. They're standing on the shoulders of generations before them. And so what I would say is, with that infrastructure, we navigate a calendar year with all kinds of activities that we're mobilizing committee members, vendors, volunteers, staff to build thousands upon thousands of people that culminates with an intensity in December with the bowl game. And in recent years, as I just mentioned, there could be a national championship game, 2 weeks later. So we stayed busy. My wife, if she was listening to this, would chime in that it's a lot of hours. It's a lot of moving parts, but it's rewarding because not many industries have the ability to work on something and to see it all play out right in front of you, as you go through the course of your schedule. So, I grew up down here, as mentioned earlier. So for me, it's more than a job. I grew up with the Orange Bowl. In fact, I think you have some ties to the Orange Bowl. I wasn't there at your dad's game.
Well, speaking about that, the Orange Bowl started in 1933, and 14 years later, in 1946, the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Mass, played the University of Miami. And at that time, Holy Cross and Boston College had great football teams. And so Holy Cross was selected to participate in the Orange Bowl against Miami. And the score was tied 6-6 with just seconds left to play.
Yes.
My father was a freshman on the team. World War II had ended, and he had enrolled late somewhere into September in 1945. And so he was a freshman coming back from having been in the war.
Right.
and he went to college on the GI Bill. And so they put my father in the game real late. It was tied 6-6 with just a few seconds to play. And he threw the ball as far as he could. And Holy Cross was trying to win the game. And it was overthrown just a little bit. And a sprinter from Miami by the name of Al Hudson
Right.
intercepts the ball and runs it back all the way
Yes.
and scores with no time left on the clock.
Yeah.
And that pass, called the lemon in the orange bowl, it helped to put Miami on the map
Yeah.
back in 1945-46 season.
That's unbelievable. Well, I remember I've been here, like I said, almost 30 years. So I always look at our history. And one day, it was years ago, and you'll remember this, I saw the name Gene DeFilippo. And I said, "Is that your dad?" And you told me this story, and I just couldn't believe it.
There was
But
one
it is
other.
one of the great endings in Orange Bowl history.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's been other great endings. Miami, Nebraska, Kansas had a game against somebody that
Virginia Tech.
Yeah, Virginia Tech that went into, scored after time had expired. I think that was 1969, something like that. But anyway, one day at practice, at Orange Bowl practice, Ox DeGroza, who was the coach at Holy Cross, he said to the team, "Okay, I'm going to give you guys, we'll have a light workout in the morning, and then I want you to go and tour Miami. I want you to have some fun because this is a bowl game and you should be enjoying yourselves."
Right.
So my father got 3 of the guys from Holy Cross. They all chipped in and they went and rented a plane. And because my father had been a pilot in World War II,
like a seaplane,
24s over Germany and Westy and places like that.
Yeah.
So when they got back, the word came to the coach, and he said, "Geez," he said, "I told you to tour the city, but not at 3,000 feet." It was quite a story, this Holy Cross Orange Bowl.
Yeah, those are great stories.
Oh, okay. Tell us about halftime. The first great halftimes that I ever remember were the Orange Bowl and not the Super Bowl.
Right.
Tell us about what goes into halftime at the Orange Bowl.
Well, you got to go back to the origins of the Orange Bowl. The person that's really the pioneer was Ernie Seiler. Ernie Seiler was the first executive director. His grandson, Jack, who was our president last year, former mayor of Fort Lauderdale, just a great lineage. He was a P.T. Barnum type guy. Back then, college football was just in a different place. It was a celebration at the end of the year, and a lot of pageantry was built around these games. So we had the Orange Bowl parade, which would be generally the day before, the game. And then at the game itself, they would spend the whole year building props that would become this majestic halftime show. And it just took on a life of its own. And I grew up down here. I remember Super Bowls here when the Steelers, played the Dallas Cowboys, for example, and it was very modest presentations. But this Orange Bowl was going on, and I was a kid, and I'd go and they'd say, "Here's a flashlight," and you would take cellophane and you do all these things, and it just was a big production. And as time went on, you saw the NFL, like everything, just really embrace that type of pageantry, which has become the premier event in America, if not the world, in the Super Bowl. And but I think the Orange Bowl does have its place in that lineage to where it's evolved. But for us, it originally was a lot of props, colors, presentation type elements is what it covered the entire field. You see pictures of it. And as it's gone through the years, it's harder to do. When the Orange Bowl played in the old Orange Bowl Stadium, it was a U shape. So you can get props in and giant stages. At Hard Rock Stadium, it's closed. And so you have to get very fancy. And there's cost considerations to do this sort of thing. I mean, the Super Bowl halftime show is a multi-million-dollar presentation. It's hard for a bowl organization to do that, but we continue it. We generally have an artist that we feature and bring in all these kinds of dancers locally and nationally to participate and, create that same element of pageantry around the field. And there are quite a few people that annually buy the Orange Bowl a ticket to come see it, and it's unique. I don't see very many other bowl games doing it. And so we've held on to that tradition.
Hey, Eric, tell us about some of the coaches and players that played in the Orange Bowl, and maybe some funny stories. I know that Switzer played against Tom out at Nebraska.
Oh, yeah.
Those must have been some stories. I mean, Howard Schnellenberger with his pipe and winning the national championship in 1984. You got to have some story. I remember watching I'm not sure on dates, but I remember an Orange Bowl when it just poured rain. I mean, it poured the whole game.
Yeah.
And tell us some stories about some of the real things that go behind the scenes in the Orange Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about working at a place that has so much history and tradition. We have moved offices, and in our current office, we were doing a whole archives project. And I remember bringing in the archivist for the Miami Dolphins over to see it because they were going to bring some elements to Hard Rock Stadium. And she was just blown away because this thing goes back 89 years now, right?
Sure.
So, example, in our office, there's a picture of when Texas played in the 40s. And I always take people around on a tour and I point and say, tell me who that person is. And it was Tom Landry in the Orange Bowl, Yeah, I can give you a couple great stories. I mean, like I said earlier, I was a former manager at the University of Florida basketball. And there's a picture in our office. It's from the 1952 Orange Bowl. And it's all these guys sitting around a locker room with Coke bottles, winning a game. And one of the guys was wearing a sweater that says MGR. And so in the office here, people would make fun of the picture, saying that was me a generation ago, Well, flash forward, we had in 2013, Alabama played Notre Dame in the national championship game down here. And tragically, 4 months later, the athletic director at Alabama, Mal Moore, passed away. And I went to the funeral, and I went with one of our members, is Dwight Stevenson, a great running back with the Miami Dolphins, lineman center with the Miami Dolphins. And I walked into the church with him, and I just couldn't move anywhere. Everybody kept swarming him. So after the funeral service, I wanted to say hello to a few people that were there from the SEC. So I said I'd meet him out front, and I go out front, and 45 minutes go by, and it starts, people started to leave. And I'm like, where's Dwight at? And I look across the street, and he's with a bunch of people. And I go across the street, and I said, Dwight, I thought you had left. And he goes, no, I want to introduce you to some of my teammates. And he goes, one by one. He goes, now this guy isn't my teammate, but you know him. And I look, and it's Joe Namath. And we had our 75th anniversary in the year 2008, 2009. And he had done so much on a documentary about the Orange Bowl. So I said to him, I want to thank you, for everything you did. You're like the definition of the Orange Bowl. He played in the 65 game. And he goes, I love the Orange Bowl. And all of a sudden, this small guy next to him starts saying, he's old. He's got to be 80 years old. And he says to me, I was in the Orange Bowl. And I look down, I go, you were in the Orange Bowl? He goes, I was in the 1952 Orange Bowl. I said, you were? He said, I was the manager. And I said, there's a picture in our office. I don't know who that. He goes, that's me. It was in the Miami Herald. So I went out, I had an iPad, and I pulled it up and showed it to Joe Namath, and this guy, Mike Bite is his name, who's his attorney. And it's sure as hell it was him. It's unbelievable.
That great.
It was great. But we've had so many great moments with great coaches and players that have come through. And, you see them, they're iconic, so they're celebrity types that people look at when I say their names. But as you know, Gene, being an athletic director, they're people. you know?
Right.
So, for example, I remember in 2005, Oklahoma played USC in a national championship game. And, I went to an event that we did for each team, and you walked in and it looked like Oklahoma was just fired up to play the game. And USC was kind of, casual. And I was like, wow, I think Oklahoma is going to be tough to beat. Look at the mentality on top of the talent. And USC just drilled them
I
and
remember that
drilled them.
game.
So flash forward, I'm like around now and I see the Fox guys, they're at a game and Matt Leinert's there. And I tell him that story and he's just laughing. He goes, "You're right." It was like it's two different worlds. You see the personality of programs that are coming through. One last story, that jumps out with me a little bit. It was really nice. And sometimes you will have a celebrity come in. And in 2001, we had Oklahoma play Florida State in a national championship game. And the movie Remember the Titans it was about to come out. And if you remember the story, Denzel Washington played a coach
Right.
that ended up, coaching a kid that got paralyzed during a football game. Well, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 years earlier that we had a student athlete here in South Florida that got paralyzed. And when Notre Dame played Florida State, we had the coaches visit him in the hospital, Bobby Bowden and Lou Holtz, who are incredible. And so I knew that this movie was coming out, and Denzel Washington, they said to us, was coming to the game and was going to flip the coin. So I invited this young man to come to the game. I stayed in touch with him. So he came, and I told the people at ABC, because ABC was Disney, still is. And I said, would it be possible for Denzel Washington to just say hello to this young man? And they said, well, we can't cross that line, but maybe if you ask him. So I knew when he was coming in, and I went back in the back parking lot, and up comes a limousine. Out pops Denzel Washington. He gets out, and it was like movie star. I was like, that is Denzel Washington. And he came up, and I just said, nice to meet you. I said, listen, here's a suite number. And he was with the coach that he was portraying. So I gave him the number of the suite. And then flash forward 4 hours later, I went up to see the young man, and he said, "You're not going to believe who came by to see me." And he came. He went. He went.
Great story.
That was pretty good
Tells
stuff.
me a lot about him. About
Yes,
Denzel.
absolutely. You have all kinds of stories.
He was tremendous in that movie. I mean, tremendous.
Yeah.
He really was. Eric, a lot of people think that bowl games are just about money. And that is the farthest thing from the truth. Why don't you talk about some of the community outreach that the Orange Bowl does in your 3-county area?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I really appreciate you asking that. Going back to 1935, when Orange Bowl was officially founded, the mission statement that was in place then has never changed. It really hasn't. It's about economic development and bringing tourism to an area. Back then, it was a sleepy town. Miami is not a sleepy town anymore, but it's still, vitally important. And it's also, by virtue of the success of the bowl game and all the other events, the ability to give back in the community in a meaningful way. So we have a program called Orange Bowl Cares. It has 4 pillars to it. One's to support youth sports. 2 is to go into education, to help out there. 3 is to do, events that generate revenues that we can give back to causes. And 3 is legacy gifts. So touching on each one quickly, we're known for football. So we want to give back to youth football and cheerleading in a meaningful way. And down here in South Florida, there's 2 buckets of youth football. One is Pop Warner. The other are independent leagues. And they're both robust. And some of the great talent in high school football that goes to college football comes from the Sunshine State, and in particular, South Florida. So we invest heavy in those programs, whether it's through grants, whether it's through programs, marketing-wise, putting on events for them. We'll do that in a significant way. We have a leadership academy that we are involved with as well. We're involved with, all kinds of different elements. We have, as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest junior tennis tournaments in the world. one of the biggest sailing regatta series, and those are community outreach investments in what we do. And then lastly, we do legacy gifts. So we're on number 6. We're doing a ribbon cutting next week where we partner with government, local, whether it's in a municipality or whether it's a county, and we match each other with millions of dollars. And we go into underserved communities, and we go into a park that needs to be renovated with a field, track, bleachers, scoreboards, you name it. We've considered it. And we've done 3 in Miami-Dade County, 2 in Broward County, and 1 in Palm Beach County. And we have 3 right now that are on the books to be done in the next 5 to 6 years. And so, again, I think you'd find this at a lot of bowl games is you want to give back in a significant way. And all that, the legacy gifts are to the side. We probably do close to $1.5 million a year in community outreach. And then on top of that are those legacy gifts. So we're proud of that. It really, candidly, with our membership, they love the game and they love the economic development and the brand and what it means to Miami and South Florida. But I think a big part of the value proposition for their time outside of work is the give back into the community.
That's unbelievable. What a great thing that is. Congratulations to you and the Orange Bowl. Before we leave, I got one more question for you, Eric. And it takes thousands of people to put on this game. But you've got a president, you've got a board, you've got so many other people that help you. Why don't you tell us about your staff and some of the members of the board, and you might want to just tell everybody how good and how hard those people work.
Yeah, it is absolutely the case, and I think you'd find that across the country at the 41 bowl games. We have almost 400 committee members, and most of them are C-level type individuals. If they've not retired, it's a lifetime for them. If you get on the Orange Bowl, you go to our monthly meetings and you'll see every generation represented. Of that group, we have, officers that kind of lead the way. There's 7 of our officers, and this year it's Frank Gonzalez, who's a partner at BDO, big accounting firm, and we have a 23-person board. And so in my job, you have to channel that board that has vision and policy in mind and to bring it into management. And I've got unbelievable colleagues here. Anna Hernandez Ochoa is our COO, highest ranked female in the bowl industry. And she's incredibly talented, was our CMO, and we promoted her up to be our COO. So you can see, how talented she is. And we have just a great team of professionals, many of which have been, on staff here for a long time. And, again, going back to your question earlier, what do you do all year? I mean, there's so many moving parts, whether it's fundraising, whether it's staging the events, whether it's the community outreach projects, whether it's going after bids for a championship game, whether it's servicing our partners at a very high level, whether it's Capital One or the Miami Dolphins and Hard Rock Stadium or ESPN. These relationships are critically important. And on top of that, you got to keep an eye on the future, between the committee and staff, because this is a transitional time in college athletics. You know it better than anybody. It's
sure
different.
Is.
And so, you've got to keep an eye on not just today, but where things are going in the future. And to do that, you got to be prepared. So between the leadership on our committee and our tremendous staff, we all do it together. And we're still standing, and we're on year 89, and we want to get to that century mark and then go another century. So we're excited about the future.
Well, we're out of time on this week's podcast. I'm your host, Gene DeFilippo, and I want to thank our guest, Eric Poms, the Executive Director of the Orange Bowl. I'm Gene DeFilippo. Thanks for your time this time, and we'll see you next time.